Okay, so let's give this a try. This is an MPT from February 2019. It's the State of Franklin Department of Children and Families versus Little Tots Child Care Center. Um, the Little Tots Child Care Center. So I haven't seen this MPT since it came out after it was released, so around 2019, and I only just skimmed it, so I haven't looked at it since then. And even at that time, I didn't look at the point sheet really. I just wanted to see what they were testing on that gear. So, and I haven't reviewed it at all because I want this to be as raw as possible for you guys to see how you would go through an MPT all muddled and everything in under that pressure that you have on the exam itself. So let's see how it goes. We'll give it a try, okay? Um, and if you have questions, then just type it in the chat and I'll respond to you as much as I can. Probably not while I'm doing the prompt, but I will definitely save the questions and then I'll get in touch and respond as appropriate. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Usually, what you want to do is this is the most important document in all of your vast materials. And let me see, let me take a look at this here. Um, it's not clear which screen you're seeing right now. So let me take a look at this. Let me pause the recording for a bit to make sure that it is recording properly for everybody. Okay, it does look like it's recording properly. So, like I said, this is the most important document in all of your files and all of your materials, really. And what you want to get out of this document are three things. I usually say what you need to gather is one, the format in which you need to give your answer, two, the tone of voice, and then three, which is the most important thing to gather from this document before you move away from it, is the identifying the issues that they're testing you on, and there's always at least two issues. So look for those issues. You may not know it perfectly, but you should at least identify something so that you have an idea of where to go for or what to look for when you get to your materials. Okay. So here, saying we represent Ashley Baker, who became the owner and operator of Little Tots. So those are names of players involved. So you want to kind of keep track of that information. The care center. She has received a notice that the Department of Children and Families will revoke her license to operate the daycare center. She has no administrative remedy. We have to file a complaint to challenge the license. So we're filing a complaint to challenge the license revocation and a motion to seek a preliminary injunction to prevent the revocation until a trial can be held. The courts have set a date, 90 days from today, for trial on the merits. The hearing on the preliminary injunction is this Friday. So it looks like they're honing in on the hearing on the preliminary injunction. So that's likely where our issues will be. At the hearing, I expect to call Ms. Baker and Jacob Robbins as witnesses. So they've attached a note Ms. Baker gave outlining her proposed testimony. I've also attached recent communications concerning Little Tots and 3 notice of deficiency reports issued by the department within the last 7 months. I expect the department will oppose our motion, will call the inspectors to testify that what they found during the inspection. Okay. So now this is where it's you like bell should be ringing, where it says, please prepare the argument section. So now we gather that the tone of voice is persuasive. The format is just the argument section. So as soon as I see this, I would go over to my planning page where I will be giving the answer, and I would write argument section because I'm building my skeleton outline as to how to write these answers. Prepare the argument section about brief in support of the motion for preliminary injunction to enjoin the department from revoking her license to operate little tots. So this is the argument. You want to be finding the issues to discuss here. And so let's see, we want to really highlight what they say here. Argument section about brief in support of the motion for the preliminary injunction. Follow our office guidelines in drafting the argument. We'll see that on the next page, I'm sure. Don't assume that we will have any rebuttal brief. We need to do what they always want us to do in persuasive writing, is to acknowledge counter arguments and discount it. So now we know that we're writing a brief in support of a motion for preliminary injunction. We know that. That's not very descriptive in terms of what issues, but here it says be sure to address all the requirements for a preliminary injunction, because judges must make specific finding as to the evidence relied upon in granting or denying motions. You must marshal and discuss the evidence we have available in support of the requirements. Okay. So we need to be mindful of this. Right? And it says don't include separate statement of facts, which is great. So then I will want to make a note of what they are telling us that we need to do. Basically, and depending on how much note you need, you would be doing the argument section in support of motion for preliminary injunction, essentially, to enjoin the FDCF from revoking Ms. Baker's license to operate little tots. So it depends on how much notes you need to keep you organized as to what things you have to address. And so they're telling us this is the argument we need to make. We need to make argument in support of the motion for the preliminary injunction. And inside of that argument, you need to address all the requirements for the preliminary injunction. All requirements for prelim injunction. So that's where the discussion will need to be. And if you haven't gathered already, this is more of a rules, MPT, a rules analysis. And then it says that you need to marshal and discuss the evidence we have available in support of the requirements. Okay. So that's where these issues are going to come into play. So I'm building my outline essentially. And now you're looking at the second page where they're telling you, and it's not anything different. You should be familiar by now of persuasive writing and the fact that they want you to have proper heading and they want you to have these instructions that should be very familiar to you. So now we're getting a sense that this is the body of the argument section that you are laying out. Okay, so I would correct that to say body of the argument, and obviously you wouldn't have these. Those were just my notes for your purposes, but you would start with body of the argument, and then the heading, I really would just, you know that you're doing persuasive writing, so just wait until you know what you're arguing for sure before you go into getting your headings laid out. And if you recognize that this is more of a rules-based MPT, it's better to go probably to the library material first. So if you go to the library material, you see that they have the Franklin Child Care Center Act. And usually I would say that you don't need to read the statutes too closely because chances are you're gonna have better materials to explain what the statute is about. But you could just make a note that they did give this Child Care Center Act, and and you can kind of like skim it a little bit to see what it's about, but essentially it's telling you what the purpose of this legislation is and how you're required to have license, and then they are giving you the Franklin Code, the FAC, for that with respect to the child care center. Again, of course, it's heavily child care centric. And so again, just skim it, and the Department of Children and Families have determined these standards for how to run child care centers, I'm presuming. Right? So they have this list of requirements here, and just keep in mind, so what you should gather from this is, okay, they've got these lists of requirements, enrollment procedures, staff qualifications, staffing, probably like, you know, how many people you need to have depending on how many children you have, and then meals and nutrition. So just keep those things in mind, but you don't have to be obsessive and try to remember everything. Okay, you get to the cases because chances are the case is probably going to tell you what to look for. And here, when you go through the case, you've got Lang versus Lone Pine School District. You're reading the Lang's parents of a 7-year-old child sued the Lone Pine School District for violating his rights as a child with disabilities and sought preliminary and permanent injunctive relief. So that's important. They sought preliminary and permanent injunctive relief, kind of like, you know, what we're wanting here. The trial court conducted a hearing on the motion for a preliminary injunction. And then to allow Michael to attend school with a service animal, and granted that motion. So the trial court granted the motion. So you gather that the trial court granted the preliminary injunction. The trial court stayed the effective date, prepared to preserve the service animal. The district filed an interlocutory appeal from the trial court's grant of the injunction. The action was brought under the Franklin Education Act, the parties did not raise the question of plaintiffs, whether plaintiffs have a claim under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that's just to prevent you from going down that route, which is great because we only care about the injunction. We review the trial court's decision and affirm, so they also granted the motion. Okay, so they affirmed this decision. At the hearing, the parents testify. And so you're going through and you're reading this. Okay, so it's just saying out a case for him being able to, that the service dog was good for him. Okay. So this again is just, it's good for him. So we really are not caring too much about that because we really want to just look at the requirements for preliminary injunction, okay? And what type of evidence you need to have in support for those requirements. So the principal testified, the district denied the request because, and these are the denial of the request. Okay, so so now we get to the importance of preliminary injunction standard. Preliminary injunctive relief is an extraordinary remedy and is disfavored by the courts, but it can be granted in appropriate cases to reserve the status quo pending a decision on the merits. A party seeking a preliminary injunction must meet this 4-factor test. Okay. So here are the 4-factor tests, and this matches up with requirements for a preliminary injunction. So that the benefits of granting the injunction outweigh the possible hardship. Okay, so this is looking really nice, like this whole, essentially this whole paragraph here. This whole paragraph here really is, unfortunately, in PDF itself, we can't really mark that, but we can maybe do this where this is what if I had a writing and I can write, this is essentially the rule, the requirements right here. And the likelihood of success, these are basically elements of a preliminary injunction that you have to prove in order for you to get your injunction. So where it says all requirements for preliminary injunction, where at this point, again, you don't necessarily need to you don't necessarily need just yet to write out your perfect answer. You're just trying to get an outline for you to build your answer. So at this point, you may be where you're thinking that you have this preliminary injunction standard. And you can make a note that these standards, the rule itself comes from the first case. Okay. And you would want to make a note that it's the Lane versus Lone Pine School case. Um, so, and hopefully you are able to recognize that this is where the rule is, that you made a note of it because you were paying attention to what you were reading. And so the first thing you need to show is the likelihood of success on the merits. Right? And the second thing is the moving party will suffer irreparable harm. Right? If the injunction is not granted. The third is the benefits of granting the injunction. Basically, the cost benefit balancing test. Right? And if you have studied, and hopefully you would have by the time you get into the exam, you have studied the preliminary injunction, the TRO, or such, you know that there's a balancing test. That's one of the elements that's used to argue for an injunction. And then the last element is that the issuance of the preliminary injunction serves the public interest. So yeah, it matches up with what we've learned about preliminary injunctions and TROs. It's the public interest argument. So now you just basically go through and you would be knowing that the discussion you need to have in the rule itself is going to be in this discussion here. And you can borrow language similar to what you have, and you don't need to be reading it closely for you to be able to make it a part of your answer here. All you need to know is a lot of that information of explaining what these elements are is in this case. And when you start to write out your answer, this is where you can really borrow language from the case. An alleged harm or injury is irreparable when the injured party cannot be adequately compensated by the damages. So you can borrow that as your rule statement for irreparable harm, balance of benefits and hardship. Right? So when you get down to there, you can replace this of benefits and hardships, right? To match up with what they tell you in the materials there. And the balance of benefits and hardship is, these are kind of little snippets of black letter law that you can include in your writing when you are explaining these different requirements of the preliminary injunction. Right? So the trial court must consider whether it serves a public interest. And that's fairly self-explanatory. So what you're seeing in this case is it just lays out those things and make arguments as to how those fit in. But what you gather from that case itself is it's really explaining what you need to prove in order for you to go through and argue for them to grant you a motion for um, getting your injunction. And so now that you've gone through the library materials and you know what these arguments are, you want to be going through your file to look at the facts for you to get, um, look at the facts for you to match it up so that you can support your arguments, let's say. Okay. And the way you do that would be um, going through the facts themselves. And here you are looking at, you essentially just want to follow the facts and highlight things that pop out at you based on the likelihood of success of the merits, the irreparable harm, the balance of benefits and hardship, and the public interest argument. So these are the notes that the client has given you as to what she's going to testify to. So these are facts in support of your essentially argument for an injunction to not take away her license. Okay. Okay, so this is kind of, it may be important. It's the only child care center in the neighborhood that serves low income families. And so this seems to be where you've got this hardship. Maybe she's having a difficult time trying to meet these standards. Okay, so this one says, if I'm forced to close, I will be without any income, will lose that grant. We'll have to find a way to repay my business loan. So there's some irreparable harm there that you could use that. Um, losing a client, that's irreparable harm. So you're just basically highlighting facts that you can use to make arguments for these tests here that you need to, or elements that you need to prove to get your injunction. Okay, so there's a lot of irreparable harm involved there. And of course, you know, there were other facts up here as well for meeting these elements here. And then, and then if you skim down to see, So it's very heavily fact-based here. Um, so right, yeah. So you're just basically going through the facts, and you're looking at these standards that they have here, um, and um, and so this is what they're showing, that some of the violations here of the non-compliance from the report of the inspector. Um, and um, and more reports of non-compliance. And this is a letter from Jacob Robbins to the parents, asking them not to close. Okay, because you're revoking its license. Talk with over a dozen parents who are upset. And so this is in support of arguing for keeping the place open. And again, they're repeating this public interest, essentially public interest idea. So that's a good fact to include in the one of the points there. So that's the idea, is that as you're going through, you're building you're getting a sense of the arguments that you are wanting to include in your answer, but this should be the big picture of how you should be laying out your answer, is focusing on these four parts of the test. Okay. So I'm gonna stop the recording so that we can kind of walk through, and yeah, so I can answer more specific questions.